to be number one. Little did I know that I would, hit with her, and I was hitting the ball pretty well. But I still didn't think about,
Eala has is obviously that much higher, and I'm going to bring in a little box.
Alex Eala walked into Indian Wells this week, ranked 32nd in the world. And tournament organizers have repeatedly been caught off guard by the size of crowds she draws throughout 2026, which is a documented pattern at this point, not a narrative. Just this week, Martina Navratilova sat down with the WTA ahead of the Sunshine Swing and delivered a public assessment of Eala's game. The left-handed variety, the tactical sharpness, and exactly where the work still needs doing. The assessment was measured and deliberately balanced, with genuine credibility behind every word. The moment Navratilova's assessment of Alex Eala landed alongside the claim that she is the biggest draw on the upcoming tours, the tennis world had no measured response left to give. Tennis experts genuinely lost it. And to understand why, consider that 12 months ago this was a player carrying a 2-14 career record. A wild card ranked 140 who walked into Miami and beat 3 Grand Slam champions in succession without dropping a set. She is now seated at Indian Wells with California, holding nearly 2 million Filipino residents outside those gates. And the conversation Navratilova just ignited runs much deeper than the initial reaction suggests. Subscribe right now, because where this story goes next is something mainstream tennis coverage hasn't caught up to yet. Grasping why tennis experts lost it requires going back to exactly what Martina Navratilova said, and more importantly, what she didn't say, because the headline and the actual substance of what she said are pointing in 2 different directions. The WTA published an interview with Navratilova ahead of the Sunshine Swing, where she was asked to assess the current landscape of women's tennis heading into Indian Wells and Miami. She covered Sabalenka, Swiatek, Gauff, and Rybakina across the conversation. When Alex Eala's name came up, something shifted in the tone. Navratilova didn't approach her as an interesting story. She treated her as a legitimate subject of professional scrutiny. She's crafty, she's a good lefty, she uses her variety nicely, Navratilova said, before identifying the serve as the single area needing the most development, saying Eala needs a bigger kick and more punch behind it, with her slight build identified as the reason absorbing pace remains difficult, before suggesting that targeted physical development could resolve it over time. An 18-time Grand Slam champion, someone who spent decades studying the mechanics of elite women's tennis from the inside, gave Alex Eala a genuine tactical breakdown, far removed from a feel-good quote engineered for a viral moment, with a specific weakness named and a concrete development pathway attached directly to it. That is the kind of treatment reserved for players the sport considers legitimate threats. And that distinction matters enormously when you consider what came next. The Nothing Major podcast has built a reputation for retired professionals saying the quiet parts out loud. Sam Querrey, Steve Johnson, John Eisner, these are players who spent years inside the locker rooms of the biggest tournaments on earth. The inner mechanics of crowd energy and drawing power are things they understand from years of direct professional experience, and crucially, none of them carry a contractual reason to be diplomatic about any of it. When Querrey posed the question, is Alex Eala the biggest draw in women's tennis right now? Johnson's answer arrived without hesitation, placing her ahead of both Sabalenka and Gauff in terms of raw drawing power. Eisner reinforced the point by directing attention towards something the sport had genuinely underestimated: the size of the Philippine market and what it means to finally have a women's star emerge from it. Navratilova's WTA assessment arrived roughly 2 weeks after this podcast exchange had already ignited the conversation, adding a layer of credibility that sharpened the debate further and is precisely what sent tennis experts over the edge. Eala is ranked 32nd in the world. Sabalenka has reached 5 of the last 6 major finals and converted 3 of them into titles, while Gauff won the US Open and carries one of the most recognized commercial profiles in the sport. None of those credentials are under dispute here. What Johnson was addressing sits entirely outside conventional metrics: the raw atmospheric energy a player generates upon walking onto a court. something the sport has no honest framework for measuring. On that specific measure, the evidence had been accumulating since March 2025. It started at the 2025 Miami Open, where she arrived as a wild card ranked 140th with a 2-14 career record at tour level and no back-to-back professional wins to her name. What followed was one of the most startling individual tournament runs in recent WTA history. Yelena Ostapenko fell in the round of 64. Madison Keys, the reigning Australian Open champion at the time, was dispatched in the round of 32. A walkover arrived in the round of 16 when Paula Badosa withdrew injured, and Iga Swiatek was waiting in the quarterfinals as world number 2. Straight sets, 6-2, 7-5 against a 5-time Grand Slam champion. Eala eventually fell to Jessica Pegula in a 3-set semifinal, 7-6, 5-7, 6-3, after pushing a world number 4 to the limit across 2 hours and 26 minutes. She left Miami ranked 75th, having entered at 140th, a jump that marked a genuine landmark for Philippine tennis. What made that Miami run more significant than a single breakout result was the crowd phenomenon that arrived alongside it. Filipino supporters filled sections of Hard Rock Stadium throughout her run, and the energy surrounding every Eala match became part of the story in its own right. The sport was getting its first real look at what happens when a player from the Philippines competes at the highest level of women's tennis, and the reception was impossible to ignore. It planted a question in the minds of tournament directors and broadcast partners that the following months would answer definitively. By January 2026 at the Australian Open, Eala lost in the first round to Alicia Parks, but the match itself became a secondary story almost immediately. The court she was assigned couldn't contain the crowd that showed up. Navratilova and Lindsay Davenport, commentating for Tennis Channel, both addressed the situation on air. Davenport stating directly that Eala should have been placed on a bigger show court, and Navratilova pointing to the fans who had been queuing outside for over an hour with no realistic chance of entry. This was happening on a day that broke the Australian Open single-day attendance record at 101,696. Through February, the momentum continued. Abu Dhabi brought a quarterfinal finish and her first entry into the WTA Top 40, before Dubai, another WTA 1000 event, produced a win over world number 7 Jasmine Paolini before Coco Gauff ended her run in the quarterfinals, a result that lifted her to a career-high ranking of 31st in the world. In Dubai specifically, tournament organizers actively built scheduling decisions around her match times to maximize viewership back in the Philippines, where fans were tracking every result through the night across the time difference. The draw she generated there was significant enough that her match placement directly affected crowd numbers for other players competing in the same sessions, a logistical reality the tournament had to manage carefully throughout the week. What makes the biggest draw label significant in the context of Navratilova's assessment is that it exposes a structural truth about how tennis popularity functions in 2026. Sabalenka's fanbase is global, but distributed thinly across dozens of separate markets, and Gauff's American following operates within a domestic sports landscape that forces tennis to compete simultaneously against the NFL, NBA, and MLB for the same pool of attention. Eala represents the undivided focus of an entire nation. The Philippines, with over 115 million people and a sports culture of genuine intensity, had no women's tennis player at the highest level of the sport before her arrival. That concentrated national investment has materialized physically at tournament after tournament throughout 2026, generating crowd impact that ranking numbers have no mechanism to reflect. California alone holds nearly 2 million Filipino residents. Indian Wells, where Eala is competing right now as a seeded player for the first time in her career, sits directly within that demographic. The Sunshine Swing, Indian Wells followed by the Miami Open, represents the stretch where her drawing power will face its most visible test over the next 3 weeks. Miami is where she became known in 2025, and she returns this time with 390 ranking points on the line and a career-high position built across 12 months of work that she cannot afford to let slip. Returning to what Navratilova said about the serve, reveals more than a coaching observation. When an 18-time Grand Slam champion isolates one specific technical weakness and immediately attaches a physical development pathway to fixing it, the implied message is that the rest of the game is already in order. The left-handed variety and ground-level threat are already established weapons at tour level, while her tactical intelligence, reading a match situation and adjusting without losing composure, operates well beyond what most players demonstrate at 20. Navratilova specifically noted that Eala embraces competition rather than retreating from it, which is the one competitive quality that cannot be coached into a player from the outside. The serve is a fixable technical problem, whereas everything Navratilova praised reflects qualities already embedded deeply enough to hold under pressure. That profile, genuine elite intangibles in place with one specific technical gap still to close, is precisely what a player looks like just before breaking into the top tier of the sport. Tennis experts lost it when Navratilova's glowing assessment of Alex Eala arrived in the same breath as the claim that she is the biggest draw on the upcoming tours. The evidence had been accumulating in plain sight for 12 months, while mainstream coverage kept treating it as a feel-good subplot. A 20-year-old has been filling venues across 3 continents, forcing scheduling conversations at 2 of the sport's biggest events, and received a genuine tactical endorsement from one of the greatest analytical minds the game has produced. The upcoming tours, Indian Wells, then Miami, are about to determine whether the draw and the results finally converge. If this breakdown gave you something the standard tennis coverage didn't, a sharper angle, the actual context sitting behind the headlines, then this channel is exactly where you need to be throughout the Sunshine Swing and beyond. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay locked in, because the Alex Eala story is nowhere near its most interesting chapter yet, and you do not want to be catching up when it gets there.